The security footage from Camera 4B in Terminal 4 was grainy, silent, and initially unremarkable. It captured the mundane rhythm of an airport waking up before dawn. It was December 23rd, just 2 days before Christmas, and the clock in the corner of the screen read 5:45 a.m. The airport was suspended in that strange hollow quiet that only exists in the very early hours, a calm before the inevitable storm of holiday travelers. But this specific recording, this simple digital file, would soon be dissected by federal investigators, played on a loop by major news networks, and studied in law schools for years to come. It documented the exact moment a routine morning commute turned into a constitutional crisis. The woman visible in the frame, walking with a steady, purposeful gait, had no idea that her life was about to intersect with a force that would strip her of her dignity, only to hand her the power to dismantle an entire system. Before we unravel the layers of this unprecedented event, I want to welcome you. If you appreciate deep dives into the stories that shape our understanding of justice, make sure you're subscribed. We are going to walk through every second of this case, and trust me, you need to see how this ends. Federal Judge Elena Washington was a woman who lived by a code of precision. At 54 years old, she had spent nearly half her life in service to the law. Her career trajectory was the stuff of legal legend in the corridors of Chicago's Federal Plaza. She had started in the trenches as a public defender, fighting for the indigent in overcrowded courtrooms before crossing the aisle to become a formidable prosecutor, and finally earning a nomination to the federal bench. Her reputation was built on an unshakable foundation of fairness and an intellect that could dismantle the most convoluted arguments with surgical grace. That morning, however, she wasn't Judge Washington. She was just a daughter trying to get home. She had just concluded a marathon trial involving corporate embezzlement that had consumed her life for 6 weeks. The jury had returned a verdict late the previous night, and Elena had barely slept. She was running on adrenaline and the specific type of exhaustion that comes from holding the fate of others in your hands. Her destination was Philadelphia, where her 80-year-old father was waiting. It would be their first Christmas since her mother passed away, and the emotional weight of the trip was heavy on her mind. Elena was dressed for travel but maintained the polished aesthetic of her profession. She wore a tailored charcoal wool trench coat over a cream-colored cashmere turtleneck and pressed trousers. Her hair was styled in neat braids pulled back into a low bun. She pulled a sleek, rolling carry-on bag with her left hand and carried a worn, high-quality leather briefcase in her right. To the casual observer, she looked like exactly what she was: a successful professional navigating the world with confidence. She had arrived at the airport with plenty of time to spare, a habit born of a lifetime of court deadlines. She had cleared the TSA checkpoint efficiently, her pre-check status allowing her to bypass the longest lines, and was now making the long walk to Gate D12. Stationed near the entrance of the concourse was Officer Brandon Miller. Miller was 35, a 7-year veteran of the Airport Police Division. He was a man who took up space physically, standing over 6 feet with a build that he maintained religiously in the gym. His posture was rigid, his eyes constantly scanning the thinning crowd. In the break room, Miller was known as a producer, an officer who generated citations and stops. But among the whispers of the custodial staff and the wary glances of frequent flyers, he was known for something else. Miller had a specific radar. He seemed to operate on a frequency where suspicion wasn't based on behavior, but on bias. There had been rumblings about Miller's conduct in the past. 4 separate complaints had been filed against him in the last 3 years. They all followed a similar narrative: aggressive questioning of minority travelers, searches that felt punitive rather than protective, and a general demeanor of hostility. In every instance, the department's internal review board had cleared him. They cited his proactive policing and the high-stress environment of post-9/11 airport security. The complaints were filed away in a dusty cabinet, treated as the cost of doing business. But on this cold December morning, Miller's instincts were about to lead him into a collision with a force he was woefully unprepared to handle. Miller watched Elena Washington approach from 50 yards away, his gaze locked onto her. He didn't see a federal judge. He didn't see a weary daughter missing her mother. He saw a black woman in expensive clothes with high-end luggage, moving with a confidence that he interpreted as arrogance. In his mind, the math didn't add up. He stepped away from the wall he was leaning against and moved into the center of the concourse, positioning himself directly in her path. Elena saw the officer move. She didn't break her stride initially, assuming he was stepping out to observe someone else, or perhaps check a monitor. But as the distance closed, she realized his eyes were fixed on her. His body language was confrontational, a physical barricade erected specifically for her. She slowed down, her internal alarm bells beginning to ring. Not the alarm bells of a criminal, but the alarm bells of a black woman who knew that innocence is rarely a shield against authority. "Ma'am, hold it right there," Miller said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the flat, undeniable weight of a command. Elena stopped. She took a breath, composing herself. She shifted her grip on her briefcase. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem?" Miller didn't return the greeting. He stepped into her personal space, closer than was necessary for a conversation. "Where are you headed today?" "Philadelphia," Elena answered calmly. "I'm catching the 7 a.m. flight." "And what's your business in Philadelphia?" Miller asked. His eyes were darting over her coat, her bag, her hands. Elena paused. She knew the law. She knew that in a consensual encounter, she wasn't obligated to answer personal questions. But she also knew the reality of the street. She was tired. She wanted to get to her father, and she decided that cooperation was the path of least resistance. "I'm visiting family for the holidays," she said, keeping her voice even. "That's a lot of luggage for a holiday visit," Miller remarked, gesturing vaguely at her standard-sized carry-on. "How long did you say you were going for?" "I didn't say," Elena corrected him gently. "But I'll be there for 4 days." "What line of work are you in?" The question was rapid-fire, designed to catch someone off guard. "I work in the legal system," Elena said. She purposely kept it vague, not wanting to pull rank unless absolutely necessary. She believed that every citizen deserved respect, regardless of their title. Miller scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Legal system? You a secretary, paralegal?" The assumption hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Elena's expression didn't change, but her grip on her briefcase tightened slightly. "I work for the federal government," she clarified. Miller seemed to take this as a challenge. He squared his shoulders. "Right, the government. Listen, I'm going to need to see your ID and your boarding pass. Now." Elena reached into her tote bag, her movements slow and deliberate so as not to startle him. She produced her driver's license and held up her phone with the digital boarding pass. Miller snatched the license from her hand. He stared at it, then at her, then back at the card. He held it up to the overhead fluorescent lights, flexing the plastic as if testing its authenticity. Around them, the terminal was beginning to wake up. A group of college students in pajama pants walked by, laughing loudly. A businessman in a wrinkled suit jogged past, late for his gate. Miller ignored them all. His entire world had narrowed down to the woman standing in front of him. "This ID says you live in the Gold Coast district," Miller said, naming one of the city's most affluent neighborhoods. He looked at her with open skepticism. "That's a pricey area." "It is," Elena replied. "Officer, may I ask why I have been stopped? I've already cleared security." "Random screening," Miller said, the lie coming easily to his lips. "We have the authority to conduct secondary screenings at the gate to ensure the safety of all passengers. You fit the criteria for a random check." "What criteria is that?" Elena asked. "Because from where I'm standing, dozens of people have passed us, and I'm the only one you've stopped." Miller's face hardened. He didn't like being questioned. He especially didn't like being questioned by someone he had already categorized as a suspect. "Step over to the side," he ordered, pointing to a row of metal benches near the window. "I need to inspect your bags." This is the moment where the situation shifted from an annoyance to a violation. "I want to pause here and ask you, if you were in Elena's shoes, knowing your rights but also knowing the danger of the situation, would you have complied or pushed back? Let me know in the comments." Elena moved to the bench. She knew that escalating the situation verbally could give him the pretext he was looking for to detain her further. She lifted her suitcase onto the bench. Miller unzipped it with aggressive force. He didn't just look, he rummaged. He pulled out her folded sweaters and tossed them aside. He opened her toiletry kit and lined up the bottles on the dirty seat, inspecting them as if they contained liquid explosives. He held up a silk blouse, shaking it out, letting it fall in a heap. Passers-by were starting to slow down. The spectacle of a uniformed officer dismantling the luggage of a well-dressed woman was drawing eyes. Elena felt the heat of humiliation rising in her neck, but she forced it down. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, watching him destroy her careful packing. "Nothing here," Miller muttered, almost disappointed. He turned his attention to the leather briefcase Elena was still holding. "Open that one." Elena took a half step back. "Officer, I cannot allow you to search this bag." Miller's head snapped up. "Excuse me, you don't get to tell me what you allow. Open the bag." "This briefcase contains privileged legal documents," Elena stated firmly. Her voice dropped an octave, taking on the resonance she used when delivering a sentence from the bench. They are protected by attorney-client privilege and judicial confidentiality. Unless you have a warrant or specific probable cause, you cannot search it. Miller laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound. Lady, you're in an airport. You leave your rights at the curb. I don't need a warrant. I need you to open the bag, or I'm going to open it for you. That is legally incorrect, Elena said, and I am informing you that if you touch this bag, you will be violating federal law. Miller stepped forward, invading her space again. You're refusing a lawful order? Is that what you're doing? You're resisting. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out her smartphone. She tapped the screen and hit record. She held the phone up, keeping it steady. I am not resisting. I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights. I am recording this interaction for my own safety. And for the record, state your name and badge number. The sight of the camera triggered something primal in Officer Miller. He pointed a finger in her face. Put that phone away. You can't record here. This is a secure area. I am in a public terminal, Elena said, speaking to the camera as much as to him. I have a right to record a public official in the performance of his duties. I am Judge Elena Washington of the United States District Court. I am being detained by an officer who has refused to provide probable cause. The declaration of her title hung in the air. For a split second, uncertainty flickered in Miller's eyes, but his ego crushed it instantly. He couldn't back down now. Not in front of the crowd that was forming. Not when he had already committed. I don't care if you're the Queen of England, Miller shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Put the phone down and give me the bag. He lunged for the briefcase. Elena pulled it back instinctively. Miller grabbed her arm. That's it, Miller yelled. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and interfering with security operations. Two other officers, alerted by the raised voices, came jogging up the concourse. Officer Sarah Jenkins and Officer David Chen arrived just as Miller was twisting Elena's arm behind her back. Miller, what's going on? Officer Jenkins asked, breathless. She looked at the scene, the clothes strewn on the bench, the calm woman being manhandled, the phone still recording in her other hand. She's refusing a search. She's belligerent. Miller spat out, wrestling the phone from Elena's hand and shoving it into his pocket, stopping the recording but not deleting the file. Get the cuffs. Officer, Elena said, her face pressed against the cold glass of the window where Miller had pushed her. I am a federal judge. You are making a mistake that will end your career. Officer Chen looked terrified. He recognized the tone of authority in Elena's voice. He looked at Miller. Brandon, maybe we should call the sergeant. If she's a judge. She's lying, Miller screamed. He grabbed the handcuffs from his belt. She's a suspect who refused to search. Cuff her now. Reluctantly, driven by the hierarchy of the force and the chaos of the moment, Officer Chen assisted. The metal cuffs clicked shut around Elena's wrists. The sound was distinct, a mechanical finality that silenced the murmuring crowd. 6:02 a.m., Judge Elena Washington, a pillar of the justice system, stood in handcuffs in the middle of Terminal 4. The crowd had grown significantly. People were holding up their own phones now. A young man in a hoodie was live streaming. A mother covered her child's eyes. The shame that Miller intended to inflict on Elena was backfiring. The crowd wasn't looking at a criminal. They were witnessing a martyrdom. You have the right to remain silent, Miller reciting the Miranda warning with a sneer, dragging her away from her scattered belongings. I am fully aware of my rights, Elena said. She walked with her head high, despite the awkward angle of her arms. Better than you are, officer. They marched her through the terminal. It was a long walk. Every step was documented by dozens of witnesses. The video that would later go viral showed a black woman in a wool coat, dignified and silent, being led away by a red-faced shouting officer while her personal items lay abandoned on a bench behind her. This brings us to a critical question. When you see an arrest happening in public, do you automatically assume the person did something wrong, or do you question the context? It's a hard thing to unlearn. Let's talk about that in the comments. The ride to the airport police station was short and silent. Miller drove. Elena sat in the back of the patrol van, caged behind the wire mesh. She closed her eyes and began to mentally draft her filing. She wasn't crying. She was strategizing. She memorized the timeline. She replayed the exact wording Miller had used. She cataloged the lack of probable cause. At the station, the intake process was surreal. The desk sergeant, a man named Kowalski, who was 3 years away from retirement, looked at the booking sheet Miller slammed down. Obstruction, Kowalski asked, looking at the well-dressed woman standing calmly before him. Refused a bag search, claimed to be a judge, Miller scoffed. Elena looked at Kowalski. I'm not claiming, Sergeant. My credentials are in my wallet, which Officer Miller currently has in his possession. I am Judge Elena Washington. I demand my one phone call immediately. I am calling my attorney, Marcus Thorne." Kowalski's face drained of color. He knew the name. Everyone in the city's legal circles knew Marcus Thorne. He was a civil rights shark who ate police departments for breakfast, and he knew Judge Washington. Kowalski looked at Miller. "Did you verify her ID?" "It looked fake." Miller shrugged. Kowalski opened the wallet. He pulled out the federal judicial identification card. It was heavy, laminated, and unmistakably real. He looked up at Miller, and his expression was one of pure horror. "You arrested a federal judge?" "She refused the search." Miller doubled down, though his voice wavered for the first time. "She asserted privilege," Kowalski hissed. He grabbed the phone. "Uncuff her, now." "I'm processing her," Miller argued. "You are done processing," Kowalski shouted. "Take the cuffs off before the FBI kicks down my door." Elena was released from the handcuffs, rubbing her wrists where the metal had dug in. "I am not leaving," she said icily. "Not until my attorney arrives, and this is fully documented." Marcus Thorne arrived 40 minutes later. He didn't walk in. He stormed in. He was a man of theatrical intensity, wearing a camel haircoat over his pajamas, having rushed directly from his home. When he saw Elena sitting on a metal chair in the holding area, his fury was palpable. "Elaborate," Thorne said to the station commander, Captain Reynolds, who had been called in from his holiday leave. "I want the footage preserved. I want the incident report. And I want the name of the officer who thought it was a good idea to arrest a sitting federal judge for traveling while black." The release happened at 10:15 a.m. Elena walked out of the station into a blinding flurry of camera flashes. The video from the terminal had already hit Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. The hashtag #, Judge Washington was trending globally. The narrative had escaped the police department's control before they had even written the press release. Elena stood before the microphones. She looked tired, but her voice was steady. "What happened to me today," she said, "was not an anomaly. It was a symptom. If this can happen to a federal judge who knows the law inside and out, imagine what happens to the teenager, the factory worker, the grandmother who doesn't know her rights. I am fine, but the system is broken, and we are going to fix it." The fallout was nuclear. The investigation that followed was swift and devastating. The FBI opened a civil rights inquiry within 24 hours. They pulled the footage from camera 4B. They pulled Miller's body cam footage, which, miraculously, hadn't been lost. The tapes showed exactly what Elena had described. There was no belligerent behavior. There was no suspicious activity. There was only a power-tripping officer bullying a citizen. But the real smoking gun came during the discovery phase of the lawsuit that Thorne filed 3 days later. They subpoenaed Miller's internal emails and text messages. What they found destroyed any defense the police union tried to mount. Miller had a group chat with 3 other officers. The messages were a cesspool of racial slurs, jokes about thugs in suits, and competitions on who could hassle the most high-value targets. One message sent 2 weeks prior read, "Christmas is coming. Time to ruin some holidays." Dr. Evelyn Shore, a forensic psychologist brought in by the defense to evaluate Miller, ended up providing evidence for the plaintiff. Her report concluded that Miller possessed a deep-seated pathological bias and a narcissistic need for dominance that made him unfit for duty. She testified that he genuinely believed he was the hero of the story, even as he was violating the Constitution. He couldn't distinguish between a threat and a person of color simply existing. The airport authority realized they were sitting on a losing hand. They weren't just looking at a lawsuit, they were looking at a complete reputational collapse. They tried to settle quietly, offering $1 million and a written apology. Elena rejected it. "This isn't about the money," she told Thorne. "It's about the precedent." They went to mediation. The final settlement was reached 8 months later. The number was staggering, $5.2 million, but the non-monetary terms were what made history. The settlement required the complete restructuring of the airport police training program. It mandated the creation of an independent civilian oversight board with the power to fire officers, a clause the union fought tooth and nail and lost. It required that all random stops be logged with a specific, articulated reason reviewed by a supervisor in real time. As for Officer Brandon Miller, the protection of the badge crumbled. He was fired 2 weeks after the incident, but the consequences didn't stop there, because he had falsified the arrest report claiming Elena was violent, a claim disproven by the video. He was charged with filing a false official statement and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. He pleaded guilty to avoid jail time, receiving 3 years of probation and a permanent ban from working in law enforcement or private security anywhere in the United States. The final scene of our story takes us back to the airport 1 year later. It is Christmas Eve again. Judge Elena Washington is walking through Terminal 4. She is heading to see her father, who is now 81. She walks past the spot where she was arrested. The bench is still there, but something is different. The officers on patrol are wearing body cameras that are blinking green, indicating they are recording. They are standing differently, less like predators, more like guardians. A young black woman is stopped near the gate for a bag check. Elena pauses to watch. The officer is polite. He explains why he is stopping her. He checks the bag quickly, smiles, and thanks her for her patience. Elena watches this interaction. She tightens her grip on her briefcase. The same briefcase. She doesn't smile exactly. It's too heavy for that. But she nods. A small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement that the world has shifted, even if just a few inches, because she stood her ground. This story forces us to look in the mirror. It asks us what we accept as normal. It reminds us that rights are like muscles. If we don't exercise them, they atrophy. Judge Washington had the power and the knowledge to fight back, but she fought for those who don't. What would you have done if you were in that terminal? Would you have pulled out your phone? Would you have stepped in? Justice isn't just a verdict in a courtroom. It's the choices we make when we think no one is watching. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe and share it. These are the conversations we need to be having. Until next time, keep your eyes open and stay safe.